Hello, I'm Abby Trigger and welcome back to Serious Sunday. So Serious Sunday is a series that isn't really a series that is done in a video, even though it's not really a video, it's more of a podcast, and yeah, it's like a one-man podcast thing with some Fortnite background gameplay. So if you like Fortnite, you can watch it. It's not the best of Fortnite gameplay ever, but you might find it interesting, and then also it's going to be mostly about the audio though, so you can minimize the tab, or you can use YouTube Red and you can play it without listening to it, but you can just listen to the goodness of the day, because last week I think I spent an entire 29-minute video talking about Sundays, and Sundays are important, but today's video is not about the importance of Sunday, it's about the importance of planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is one of my favorite, phrases to talk about, because, first of all, it's a fun phrase to say, but second of all, because it's a really important issue to really get out into the world and discuss. So yeah, planned obsolescence, it's something you likely believe in, even if you don't know it, because it is the idea that many manufacturers of many goods, whether it's usually phones you talk about, but, in some cases, cars, any other good in the world, is manufactured with the idea that, they'll make it explode in some amount of time, or make it, perform less after some amount of time, so that you'll be more interested in buying their next product. And one of the big reasons this is such a suspicious thing with phones is that every phone manufacturer releases a brand new phone every year, even though there's not that much innovation every year, and they hope that for some reason you'll buy a new phone, despite the fact that your old phone from 2 or 3 years ago should still be fine. Like, the Galaxy S6 should still be fine to this day, the iPhone 5 should still be fine, but neither of those things are fine in this mundane age, right? Because you look at those, you're like, ooh, that's not okay. And then also because if you try to use one of those phones, it won't properly work with modern day apps quite as well as it did when it first came out. And there's lots of reasons for this, but I wanted to talk about it because it really came to the, it came up again recently with the whole Apple battery thing. If you don't know, Apple literally put a thing on their old phones. I think it was, it's got to be at least 2 years old, where because the battery starts to age and do not so great, they would underclock the performance like crazy, so your phone would just run slower and slow. And honestly, even though I like to hate on Apple, actually, let me clarify my anti-Apple credentials here, because honestly, people who defend Apple seem to, Apple is the one-size-fits-all approach, and I've never been a fan of it because it seems to just be like, hey, how about we just give you something, and we don't give you options, and then we sell you that for more? Is that something you're down with? And everyone just loves it and buys it. And, okay, let me explain my anti-Apple credentials here, though, because I recently just put out a picture of a bunch of, Galaxy phones, some Android phones, and then some people just decide out of nowhere, like, oh, why are those phones not iPhones? Apple phones are more secure. And, there's a bunch of people like that whenever you talk about anything. They're like, this is a good opportunity to turn this into a platform war. I really hate that in any situation, but they did it on my Twitter feed for something unrelated, and they spoke about how, like, oh, Apple has the best security. I always buy Android phones, and they're just getting broken and hacked into. Oh, real security people buy Apple. And for the record, I'm pretty certain that most, high-end company officials and, the government, they use Blackberries for some reason, because, again, weird stuff. Anyway, with that said, so when I saw all those tweets late that same day, I had a friend who was like, hey, how about, this crazy new character, it can crash iPhones again. And if you don't know, every now and then, because the iPhone is programmed in a very specific way, there are characters that can crash iPhones. There's been, 3 of them over the past, year or two that I can recall of. Maybe there's been more that just haven't been found. But there's characters that if you send them to an iPhone user, it can destroy their phone. They have to, factory reset it. It's funny stuff that, this same stuff happened. And I was so tempted. I decided, okay, I'm a YouTuber, probably got some position where I'm not meant to do this to people, but I would be that troll who is just sending out the characters to these people, just as oh, so what do you think about that security now? I just wanted to get that out of the way on my level of anti, I guess, Appleness normally, of if you defend Apple too hard for reasons that don't make sense, I might send you a phone crashing character. That's my level of, dislike towards it. So now that you know my real credentials here, let me explain why Apple actually didn't do something too bad, because as soon as they were caught doing it, which, I mean, maybe it's slightly less sincere because they had to be caught before they explained this, they actually gave the option to be like, okay, if you want to run your phone at normal thing, you'll just drain your battery faster, your phone will die twice as fast and eventually just stop working. Sure, if you want to do that and keep it running at full speed, they gave people the option, and honestly, that's kind of a nice way to get things done. But it raises the question then of wait, why does Apple even have to go back and have that option? Why don't they just make phones that last forever like you'd expect, or at least last 5 or 10 years? Why do Apple phones, or, this is also true for probably most Android phones, why do phones only last for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years maybe at max? Why is that the case? And that is planned obsolescence. So yeah, although planned obsolescence usually is sold to you as those evil executives want us to keep buying the new phone every year, so they break your existing phone, they send out an update, and you notice how after an iOS update, for instance, your phone will get slower, but this isn't because of some evil plan, probably. I mean, it could be, and we don't know yet, but the truth actually is that there is more and more power coming out every generation, so each new version of the operating system uses this power in in some cool way. So think about the fact that most phones now can multitask. Years ago, like, you know, back in Android like 4 or 2, that was basically unthinkable. And back in iOS, I don't know if the current iOS can actually multitask on phones still, because they want to really keep system resources to like a minimum, but when they have more resources, they'll up the amount they use, and then that causes issues for older phones. Anyway, the thing where this gets interesting is, you know, like you can prove that, is because if you think about the PC market, PCs don't really have the same planned obsolescence issue anymore. They used to back when we were going from Windows, you know, like Vista to 7 to 8 to 10, and like the regular updates and service packs and add-ons and stuff. You'd notice that happen a lot, you know, especially like 10, 20, 15 years ago, but nowadays you don't get it too much because everyone's on the fairly light Windows 10 operating system, or maybe whatever else you're on. Same with macOS, by the way. I think it's been on OS X for the longest time. Basically, these operating systems on the PCs aren't really changing too much, and as a result, the requirements to run them isn't changing too much either, and therefore the stuff is sticking. However, on the phone side of things, it kind of has been upgrading every 2 years. However, I do still think there's a little bit of planned obsolescence in there, but in a way that's kind of really depressing when you get really into it, because again, when they make these phones, you got to think about both, you know, let's just say Apple and Samsung, just to make it that easy 1v1 war everyone likes to think of. There's a bunch of Android manufacturers that aren't, you know, Samsung, and they just happen to be the largest. But yeah, so basically when we're talking about Apple and Samsung, when they manufacture those phones, they sell them for $999. Like Apple increased the price on their latest iPhone, I think, to over $1,000, or over 1,000 my local currency at least. But they, you know, like they increased the price massively, but that's not because their price, you know, their costs went up. Their costs have been like pretty steady. They're just like, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we could charge more? And the amount of markup in there is quite significant, and the amount they're driving down costs every year. Like Apple is notorious for being real, I guess, jerks to the factory workers because they're just the biggest player in town. So yeah, they try to drive down costs in every single humanly possible way. And if you think about it, why would they ever spend extra money to make a phone last longer? Like if you know, when you're making anything in the world, you can make it, you know, you got to kind of like have a rough estimate of how long it's going to last. We do extensive tests to like work out how many like cycles an SSD lasts, how many, you know, like power cycles, you know, monitor can last, because eventually, if you don't know, any monitor you have, it's eventually going to stop working too. I don't know how many refreshes it is. It's something like 20,000 on-off cycles. So, you know, there's a bunch of different ways you can measure these things, and the manufacturers do it extensively, and you can pay extra money to make sure it's, you know, extra nice and it'll last a bit longer. And you see this with some household products, but why would you ever pay that extra money on a phone that you know you're replacing in 2 years? And that's where I think the evilness comes from. It's not quite so much that some Apple executives is like, aha, let's spend some money and put the self-destruct device in there. I think really it's like the, oh, well, I mean, updates come out every, like, you know, 2 years for iOS, I think it is, and every year for Android, you know, brand new, like, versions, I should say. It might be every year for iOS now too, actually. But basically, there's new updates every single year, and they're just like, yeah, let's keep using new stuff, making better, cooler phones. And then also they're like, why would we spend extra money to make a phone last for 3 years when most people get rid of it after the end of 2, and we like it if you got rid of it after the end of 2 anyway. So I think that's the kind of like, you know, where things go. And it's funny how actually you can really shift, you know, the debate on like, oh, this is evil, to like, oh, yeah, that's actually quite logical. If I was in their position, I'd probably do the same, because the truth is pretty much everything in life has an expiry date, and that's a really depressing thing to get over. Like, you know, I think every human like struggles with their own mortality rate. Like, oh, it sucks that one day I'm not going to be around, and, you know, think about these things. But honestly, what I think is almost worse in some ways, this sounds ridiculous, but like whenever you build something, whatever it is, even if it's a bridge, that bridge has like an end of life cycle, and that end of life is like always way closer than you'd figure. Like, oh yeah, we're building this bridge and it's going to last for 30 years. And it's like 30 years? Like, really? In 30 years, the bridge is going to have to be like, you know, rebuilt or remaintained or something? And it's like, to me, that's like, that's a way harder thing to struggle with. Like, for instance, when you buy a house, you think of it as a forever purchase. And although a house in particular kind of is, you know, although eventually you're going to have to spend a lot of money to fix the walls because it wasn't designed to last forever. It wasn't even designed to last 1,000 years. You know, I have like a fairly good house in the UK, and I think it's got like a 500 maybe year life cycle before it has to be like basically rebuilt. But when you buy a flat in particular, or an apartment, as I believe the international lingo is, it usually has like a number of years set to it. And I know it's crazy because I went to Singapore recently. In Singapore, the government owns most of the housing, 90+%. So they only sell it to you on a 99-year lease. A lot of those 99-year leases are like halfway through now, because funnily enough, the country's actually young enough because it's from like the 50s. The country itself isn't as old as these leases, so they haven't run into the issue of like what happens after those 99 years. But when you get something, it has an end date. Sometimes you know the end date, like with those apartments. Sometimes you don't know the end date, like with those bridges. Like again, usually we just like kind of repair them every now and then. But like, when you buy a car, for instance, it's gonna stop working at 200,000 miles or whatever it is. After like 100,000, I hear you have to replace something. After like some number of thousand, you have to replace it. Basically, it's kind of like that ship thing where you replace all the bits. When you buy something, it has an end cycle built into it. It's just sometimes you know it. Again, with a car, oh yeah, once I've driven 250,000 miles, I probably am not going to be able to drive that thing anymore. When you buy a house, or at least when you buy a flat, you have the lease. In 99 years, this isn't mine anymore. But everything else you buy still has that same end date. And again, I find this like immensely distressing to really think about, because again, I'm sat here with a bunch of stuff that like my recording setup, which I'm really, really fondly attached to, like my keyboard here. I'll type on it a little bit. Yeah, you see that? That's a nice little clicking, right? And like my mouse, I really like. I spent a lot of time trying to find a mouse that I could work with properly. My monitors, I've had this monitor for like 5 years now. It's depressing to like look at this stuff and be like, yeah, well, that's gonna break in like 5 on-off cycles, etc. And I don't know, it's something you gotta realize that like whether you know it or not, whether or not they sell it, they tell you about it or not. Even furniture like this. So IKEA furniture, I didn't know this when I bought it, and it doesn't really bother me, but I buy everything IKEA because I just like IKEA. And honestly, I like their meatballs, right? That's why people buy IKEA furniture. IKEA furniture has like a 5-year life cycle, a 10-year life cycle. That's what they go for, They don't want something that lasts forever or that lasts for your lifetime or even lasts for like your generation. They make it last for like 5-10 years because, in 5-10 years you probably have different taste in furniture anyway. So anyway, there you go. There's a little lesson on like planned obsolescence seems really evil, but the truth is just because they don't tell you your phone has an end date. Like, I think if they did, then phone sales would go down. But I think it should be like one of those honesty things. Like when you buy milk, that milk isn't going to work in 7 days. Like it's going to... Actually, the sell-by date of milk is always like inaccurate. I'll drink it like 3 days after it's gone, unless it like tastes bad. And even then, apparently, it's okay to drink. But anyway, my point being here, pro tip, you can drink expired milk. Actually, I'm not going to recommend that. That's probably like a dangerous thing to recommend on the internet. But yeah, basically, planned obsolescence isn't actually evil. It's just that every phone maybe should have a, an end date to like, oh yeah, this is going to stop being supported in 18 months. And after another 18 months, you probably should expect not to use it anymore. So yeah, although it's, and pro tip on the pro tip here, by the way, is to like buy a phone that's brand new, like a year out from when it comes out. Because even though it costs like, it costs a quarter as much, and it's going to have like a lot of that life cycle still. Like you'll lose some of it, but not all of it. And yeah, I know, pro tip right there, because the battery like slowly dies as you're using it. And that is why buying things used, a lot of people have a stigma to it, but that's why used things are cheaper, even when they're exactly the same. Even when it's a like new used thing, it's still going to cost a little bit less. So yeah, I don't know, just there's like, I wanted to get that life lesson out there, because I'm still depressed that like bridges only last 30 years, and that my house at some point is gonna start crumbling, and I'm gonna have to like get an entirely new wall or roof or something like that. And maybe you should be too, or maybe you should just like, I don't know, be depressed that everything's gonna stop, or maybe just accept that everything's stopped. And I feel like that's what the real solution to planned obsolescence is. Just accept it's what they're gonna do, and hope, or that's how things work, and that nothing can last forever. And then I don't know, there you go. You can look at your old iPhone as an example of how to accept your own mortality or whatever. So with that said, let's talk about acceptance, because again, I feel like we should accept the fact that that's so happening. And I think it's funny that like acceptance is something which we kind of are taught is something that should be like universal, right? Like, oh yeah, you should universally just accept everyone else in the world into your life, right? Like, oh yeah, like doesn't matter if you're anything. Oh yeah, like the Logic song, like doesn't matter if you're gay, black, trans, dead, or alive, or Christian, or Muslim, or whatever. It doesn't matter what you are. You gotta be accepted, right? That's how acceptance works. You accept everyone. But I think it's interesting that like no matter how like acceptance works, it's never about actually accepting. It's always just about changing the barrier of what you do accept versus what you don't. So for instance, this is I feel like this is gonna sound like some crazy anti-something rant, but I swear this is just like an interesting realization I had on the way home, because for instance, my mother like fairly early on was like, it doesn't matter if you're gay, Andrew. By the way, just in case you're curious, I'm not at all, as far as I'm aware. I'll update you guys, like I'll make a a video coming out on YouTube if I am gay. Don't worry, I'll give you guys the update. But as far as I know, I'm not gay, but my mother very early on was like, it's cool if you are, just tell me, and we'll be all good. But when I made a joke about how, like, because, she's like, oh yeah, when you get your wife and whatever, and I'm like, actually, my wife's mother, I intend to have two, and she's like, no, that's not okay. And I think it's interesting that, like, no matter And, I think society as a whole generally is also on that same kind of thing, right? Like, even though I said it, like, semi as a joke, like, oh yeah, well, I mean, you have 2 girlfriends and then eventually 2 wives and whatever, even though I said that, like, kind of as a joke, that is, one, a real thing that some people do want and have, and some religions do encourage you to have, and it's, two, something that most of society says, nah, actually, that's not widely accepted. And I think it's interesting that that kind of works that way, but there's always going to be some barrier where you're like, actually, we shouldn't do that. Like, for instance, we never accept murderers, right? Like, we've also collectively agreed that we shouldn't accept people who murder other people into our lives. And I've always thought it's kind of weird that, like, there are certain boundaries where we're like, actually, no matter what, that's always going to be a no thing, because I generally believe in every single aspect of life, you can always come down to this, like, in-group, out-group thing. Like, I really think the reason that, like, for instance, Americans come together as, like, a country is because they're like, oh, but it's against the world. Like, people from every part of America are wildly different. Same with Europe, right? Like, the only reason there is, like, a vague European identity is because we're like, oh, well, there's the rest of the world out there, and they're getting bigger. And, this also comes on the acceptance thing of, like, we always, like, make it seem like we're trying to make that in-group bigger, but really we're trying to, like, push some people out of the in-group at the same time as we get some other people in. It's like a permanently revolving cycle, just so we can feel like, there's some movement going on, like there's some progress always happening. And I feel like that's actually one of the big problems of the way I guess societies work. It kind of goes back to the planned obsolescence thing of, like, well, you always have to have some progress in some direction, and even if that progress is in a circle, like, it's been proven before that, like, oh yeah, the way, countries work and the whole, like, cycles, it tends to just go in, like, one big circle, like, oh, we don't like how this thing went, so we'll try go with the opposite thing, and then, oh, this opposite thing's bad, but the other opposite, that's gonna be way better this time. And that's why, for instance, in America, it's, like, really shocking if you go back and you look at the list of presidents, because you can see how, like, it's, like, 8 years of a blue, and then 8 years of a red, and then 8 years of blue, and 8 years of red, and there are a few exceptions to that. I think the last one was in, like, 1992, when it was like, oh, this time it's 12 years of a red instead of 8. Wow, that's a crazy exception. And but yet, for the most part, you can see how it's just, like, back and forth and back and forth. And it's kind of interesting that, like, when you see it like that, it's like, maybe we were just on a huge pendulum in life, and we're just gonna go back and forth forever. And when you think of it like that, it's actually, like, kind of more relieving to think about the world as not always falling apart. Because right now, if you try to look at any news, like, I have a big issue of news as a whole, but if you look at any news article ever, it really makes it seem like the world is falling apart, right? And I mean, there are some, like, outward signs out there that, like, yeah, world is really not doing so great, but then you realize that if you look historically, like, a lot of the times big terrible things have been happening, it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. It's like, oh, what's that, this little financial, little, temporary recession, what's that all about? And all the time that something huge has happened. I mentioned before that I love looking at historical events when they first came out, because it just seems like another day in the news. Like, oh yeah, looks like today the Berlin Wall has fallen. That's interesting. It looks like people are crawling over it. Or, like, when the USSR collapsed, like the big, like, end of the Cold War. The end of, like, the longest, like, craziest nuclear war in the world, essentially. Although they never actually fight each other. When that war ended, it was like, oh, so the USSR is dissolved. That's an interesting story. I guess there's some new countries in the world today. Anyway, the weather today is going to be, and it's like, what? That's huge stuff, but they don't know how huge it is, because the impacts and something becoming big enough to, like, signify the world crumbling, they can't tell. The entire thing they're just trying to do is, like, take this situation, make it analogous to something else, and make that a thing. And in fact, that's like a big thing we do as a whole. Like, this is just a fun little pro tip. Whenever you spot someone comparing something to something else, it's the easiest thing to do. And I love analogies because I can prove how bad, like, the concept works, where it's like, so it's like how I just said earlier. You know how, like, that guy said that we should accept, like, people of any race, and that's something I think we will actually agree on, right? But, we should accept everyone, no matter what the race, but we shouldn't accept murderers. That's an analogy right there, but it's like, no, there's a different thing between accepting white people, black people, Asian people, and accepting people who murder people. There's something clearly different there. Trying to link those two doesn't make any sense. And in the same way, I feel like we do that a lot with the news, where it's like, oh, well, this is, the last time this happened, as it turns out, we had a nuclear war, so maybe, I don't know, just interesting little thing there. Reasoning by analogy, it's the easiest way to do things, but it's apparently not the smartest way of doing things. And who would have figured? So let's move on from this anyway, because I feel like talking politics for too long, one, it gets the crazies to attack you, but both sides crazies, by the way, because you know, like there are some people who are just like, everything needs to be politics. When Toycat talks about Minecraft updates, that needs to go back to politics, I reckon. There are some people about that like that for everything, but also because I feel like talking politics is the easiest way to reveal how stupid you are. Like, or like at the very least, it makes you look stupid, no matter like at what your actual intention level is. Because the truth is, politics, the reason we have like a two-sided system where some people go to one side and some people go to the other side is because they're both just talking about different parts of the same brain. Like we're like, you know, trying to work out the way to the future, and they're broadly similar ways. Like we're all humans, we're all the same, but we've even divided ourselves into like, oh yeah, some people use this part of their brain more, and that makes them think that like, oh yeah, well, you know, we're actually doing pretty well right now, and some people use this part of their brain more, which makes them think that like things could be a lot better, and why aren't we making them that way? And you know, there's a bunch of stuff like that where it's just like, you know, when you try to discuss your opinions outwardly, you're really trying to talk about an emotional subject, or at least something that's based on like the same thing as emotions, by using words, which are a logical thing, right? You're trying to, it's in the same way that like, if you ever try to discuss something that's really emotional in your life. So, I don't know, I had a bad breakup like 18 months ago, for instance. It was like, it was pretty terrible, but if I try and describe that to you in any like meaningful way, you're not going to get any meaning from that other than like, it looks like Toycat's pretty hurt there. And, you know, like, oh, it was terrible because I had to get a train, I was tired, and I was on a flight, and the thing didn't go back, and like trying to describe on the spot right now, I generally can't do a very good job at it. And if I tell you, all you're gonna get is like, again, the vague emotional feel of like, I guess he hurt then. And I feel like it's the same with like politics. Like when you say something, all you're getting across to people is like, I believe this thing, and it's like, well, I mean, but they believe that thing, and you know, you can maybe discuss some of the more rational points if you're both level-headed about it. But at the moment, you just like, anyway, on the internet is a bad place to do it. Politics on the internet, I like to read it every now and then, but it's really just like, you know, you're never going to get too far doing that. So yeah, please don't leave political comments. Like I hopefully didn't say anything that had any like political side to it. I just wanted to kind of discuss the world as I saw it. So anyway, let's move on from societal, political, and yeah, we really just discussed the whole world there, right? Like that's how the political system worked, all summarized in a nice 21-minute video on a Sunday. Hopefully this helps your Monday be a bit better. And also something that should help your Sunday be better is the fact that, you know, you're probably a good person. You watching this right now, you think you're a good person. That's not me being like, oh, 60% of people who watch this probably think they're good. I think everyone on the inside thinks they're good. And one of the ways I can tell you that that's true is the fact that we don't have such thing as an anti-charity. I was really thinking about this because we have a lot of charities in the world, and every single, you know, any cause you can donate your money to, for the most part, is a charity, right? So, you know, and most charities have really, really nice goals. Like, how about we cured heart cancer forever? And it's like, yeah, I'm down with that. Or how about we gave water to Africa, water.org, for instance. Yeah, on board with that too, actually. Or how about we gave video games to kids in hospitals? It's like, yep, these are all things that people want to support. But we don't have a single anti-charity out there that's like, if you donate your money to us, we will try and bankrupt an organization. If you donate your money to us, what we'll do is we'll follow this guy around, we'll work out where he lives, and then we'll buy every house around his house. So I don't know what this guy did wrong. We're just gonna make up an example of the person, and like we'll buy every house around his, and then like rent them out, or like, you know, do something really trashy with them, like grow drugs in them, set them on fire, do some like really terrible stuff to all the houses around it, and then we'll lower his property value. That would be a fun thing we could all contribute towards. You know, like just, you know, anti-charities are not a thing that exists. No one out there is like, I'd like to donate my money to evil. And there's, you know, you'd figure if there was even some number of people that were willing to do that, that we'd have an anti-charity. Because again, if I thought it would succeed, I would start an anti-charity right now. Because, you know, like it's doing it, even if I made an anti-charity, it'd still be doing a good thing. Because like, well, I mean, they're going to do it anyway. Might as well do it in a controlled and logical way. So my point being is like, you could have like good people run an anti-charity. But there isn't one that exists. Every single cause you donate money to is doing something good for the world, and you know, the way you can tell that for sure is that when you hear that there's like a child abuse charity, you're not like, oh, that's like an anti-charity where you just donate money and they use it to help more kids be abused. That's terrible. There's never like, oh, that's the lung cancer charity. That's the charity that's there so that, you know, we can guarantee that more lung cancer will be spread in the world. But they actually, you know, they go around, they give cigarettes to children or something. Like, that's not those are not organizations that exist as far as I'm aware. All it is that, like, you know, organizations that seem good eventually accidentally do something wrong, and it's like, I think realizing that, you know, that one, realizing lack of anti-charities probably makes you feel better about the world, or at least it makes me feel better, because not a single person has decided to set one up yet, and two, I feel like we should set up an anti-charity. Like, again, I would just like to see how many people donate towards it, because I feel like that's where you could really gauge, like, how evil comes into the world. Because if I set up an anti-charity, let's just say this anti-charity just exists to, like, put traffic in, I don't know, Birmingham. Like, that's just the goal of this charity. Like, I think it would be fun to have more traffic in, but, like, wouldn't it be crazy how much time we could take from people's days? It'd be funny to set something like that up, and then, or, like, interesting at least, and then see how people react to that. Like, or, like, we could delay all the trains in Birmingham by, like, putting things on the track. You know, we could do some, like, minorly, actually, no, actually, that's probably illegal. Like, it'd have to be something legal you do. So traffic, yeah, we'll just, like, what we'll do is we'll hire people for the day to just drive into Birmingham and, like, drive in circles and be all confused, just to see what happens. In fact, actually, wait, that's what taxi drivers do whenever there's a you know, like, whenever they have strikes. Instead of just being like, hey, we demand more money, they're like, wouldn't it be funny if we shut down the city? But yeah, so that's a legal thing to do because you can do it when you're striking. So we'll set up a charity and we'll just do it for the fun of it. And I feel like it would be so interesting to watch who donates to that, because then you get to see, like, who, you know, that's where the evilness and humanity comes from. Not because, and no one who donates to it would be like, oh yeah, I think I would like to take time away from people's days. People are just like, it's kind of, I'm curious, like, you know, I want to donate to the first ever anti-charity, for instance. I just feel like there's got to be more stuff like that, just to see the responses to it, and then we could understand what we see as, like, people being mean. Because again, there are some people that really believe there are evil people in the world, but I think most evil people just don't do, you know, like, actively good things, or that just, you know, they're concerned about things that you don't necessarily know about. So I try to think, like, what's the most evil person in the world, like, historically figure, or maybe, like, evil person that you can think of today, and if we go, you know, like, let's just leave out, like, ex-communist movements, because you can, you know, there's gonna be someone who's like, you know, actually Stalin was an okay guy if you exclude the 15 million he killed in the famines. Like, you know, like, besides that, like, Stalin was great. But anyway, so let's talk about someone that I feel like no one defends on the internet. Kim Jong-un, right? The leader of, the supreme leader of North Korea. That's his title, by the way. You might think, like, he is so evil. He is threatening the lives of, like, how many billions of people. He wants to destroy the planet just to keep himself in power. But the truth is I mean, like, one, you know, Korea, like, historically, like, South Korea isn't anymore, but Korea historically is a hermit kingdom. They just like to be to themselves anyway, and he just wants to stay alone. Like, honestly, he doesn't want to fight the world, because he knows he'd lose. Like, I think any logical person could look at that and say they're going to lose. So realistically, what he wants to do is just convince, like, anyone else that, like, you try and invade us, we might nuke you, and then everyone else stays away from him. That's what he wants. He just wants distance from the world, and although he does it in, like, a pretty messed up way, and, like, it's scary for the future, nothing too bad there. And even though he had some people in his family killed, and you might be like, geez, killing his own uncle? Well, I mean, like, again, if his uncle is a threat to the regime, and if the regime falls, there's going to be millions of refugees to other countries, which isn't good for those countries, not good for him, and, like, might cause a lot of deaths. You know, there's like, greater goods at play here, and I don't know, like, my point being is, like, I don't think even he, in his mind, is evil, and I don't think, even, like, you know, if you think about it strategically, he probably isn't. He just isn't actively doing things to make things better for his people, because, you know, that's not his priority in life. Like, so, you know, like, that's the problem with having, like, one person, is like, well, I mean, the things they set as their priority become the priority of every single person, and therefore no one gets the things going better. And I watched an interview with Gorbachev. He's the last leader of the USSR before it dissolved, and he said something like, you know, 10 years is about the amount of time where you can make a difference on a country. Any time after 10 years, and you're kind of just there like, it'd be nice if I made life better for myself. And I think that's actually true for a lot of things in life. Like, 10 years is about the amount of time you can be passionately dedicated to something before you're like, actually, but I could start caring about this and that more. And think about it this way, like, you know, schools, for instance, they change you up every, like, 4 to 6 years. You know, nothing in life is designed to last 10 years, you know, going back to that obsolescence thing, because you can't care about that same thing. You know, over 10 years, your opinion on something changes so much, and you can't give it the exact same effort you did at the start and the end. And maybe, just maybe, this same kind of philosophy of, like, oh yeah, you have to have something end at some point, have, like, a fixed term for it to end. That's why, you know, democracies work better than, you know, these systems where you just have a dude computing power for as long as he lives. The reason that works better is because you've got to have like an end date so that people are working towards something by the time it's over. You've got to have that system in place where things are going to have an end so that you can know there's going to be something new. And maybe, just maybe, Apple has those same thoughts. And that's why planned obsolescence kind of almost needs to be a thing, even though I'm not saying like they do it in an evil way. It is a thing that they just kind of like plan into the system, because if in 2 years you need to get a new phone and you just kind of accept that, then you'll get a new phone and you'll appreciate that and it'll be better. You'll be able to do more things. Whereas if you don't do that, you'll be stuck with your, your iPhone 3 from 10 years ago and it just won't work correctly, but you'll think like, oh, but I like it this way, and you'll stick with things how they are, but it's a better system to change. And yeah, right there, I did just say how basically it is, like the equivalent of never changing your phone, of being able to keep your own phone forever, would be the same as installing North Korea. Installing, Kim Jong-un into your home and turning, your phone into North Korea. Do you want your phone to be North Korea? No, you don't. Then you should probably, want planned obsolescence in the world. So I hope you did all enjoy this week. Yeah, I totally just linked planned obsolescence with North Korea. What are you going to do about it? I hope you enjoyed this week's Serious Sunday thing. Again, I think this is a fun opportunity to talk about some serious topics. Let me know if you agree or if you think it's terrible, because I had a lot of fun talking about it. I had a few people ask some questions about last week's one, and that was interesting and fun. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this week's Serious Sunday, and I guess maybe I'll do more stuff like this. And honestly, I might actually just launch some form of like real podcast, because I've said for a while like it would make sense to have something off YouTube, and maybe a podcast is a good way to do that. Although podcasts you monetize with ads, and like I don't know if that's the best way to doing things. So yeah, I'll try and work out some way of doing these in a way that you can download or something like that. But for now, if you have to use a YouTube downloader, you can do that if you want to. Or you can watch this video in the background with YouTube Red. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed it, because I'll see you all next time. Bye.